5 minutes feels like. So it's one of those funky, crazy disabilities that people like me who look quote unquote normal have extreme challenges in living our daily lives. And unfortunately, we are not yet in a society that's extremely accepting of people who look quote unquote normal that may have some funky superpower, as I think it is. So thank you once again. Let me share a little bit about our community in Trinidad and Tobago and what we've been fighting for the rights for persons with disabilities and awareness on the whole for your fellow citizens. So I have a little bit of a slideshow to just guide us through some of the topics that I hope will be pertinent to everyone. And of course, I don't know if there's time for questions after, but I'm quite happy to answer where I might be able. So the conversation is again rethinking that disability and of course neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is now such a popular word that we are using, and it's really to promote and to accept people who have differently thinking brains. And I think in the past it was seen as something you didn't want to be different. And I think now we're comfortable with, hey, be a difference, okay. And everyone has something to give. So let's try and include them in our citizenship. So as you know, my name, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a volunteer director at Caribbean Kids and Families Therapy Organization. And we're founded in 2008, and our directors are all volunteer directors look after the governance of the organization, right? So we are a non-profit provider of therapy services for children with disabilities. And from children, we do from birth straight through anywhere. What we try to do is we provide it on a means basis. So kind of like a Robin Hood, we kind of spread everything all over the place. So those who can pay full amount, some pay a little less, some pay a little less than that. We are not only about providing the actual therapeutic support, but it's also the support group and so many other things, and sometimes educating parents, and sometimes those conversations, and sometimes parents calling you on a weekend. It's so much more than it looks sometimes. And sometimes, most of the time, if you follow us on social media, we are so busy that we're not even able to put up all the stuff that we are doing. So part of it has always been trying to promote education and awareness, and we've done a lot more in the past. Pre-COVID with the education and the public education on the whole, but after COVID, I think we're all regrouping and trying to figure out our new direction. And I still think that's where we are. We're just trying to forge forward and reignite our public awareness ideas. So I just threw in a couple interesting facts. Now, you know, when I started writing proposals, it wasn't, well, didn't have 1.3 people with disabilities. It was 10% of the world's population. Now we are 16% of the world's population. That's 1 in 6 of us that have disability. I told you, when I started writing proposals, it was these numbers. When I looked at these numbers, I myself was shocked. Well, I think this one is no surprise to us. 1 in 100 children with autism. And if you've heard follow American news, you would have heard quite popularly these days, they're talking about that 1 in 31 American children have been identified or labeled with ASD, with autism spectrum disorder. And that is a big deal for them. So that's the American numbers, but of course we follow the World Health numbers, so we're going to go with the 1 in 100, right? One of the other things that I've always thought interesting over the years, and have worked with, of course, some of our international funders, is that in Spain, they've got this great law where companies that have more than 50 workers, 2% of their work population have to have significant disabilities. And I think for a country to enact something as profound as that shows their commitment really to neurodiversity and including people with special needs. Because as we all know, over the years, we've seen the growth of, beside the Einsteins and our generation, we've seen the Elon Musk, the Bill Gates, all those people who have autism be able to offer so much to our communities. So I think this whole conversation about doing this webinar came up because, of course, April was Autism Awareness Month. And a lot of the disabilities have been given days by the United Nations. And April was Autism Awareness Month. Now, autism awareness they've changed their international symbol to the infinity sign. Before it was a puzzle piece, and that became very controversial because there was talk in the autism community that, hey, autism is not a disability that needs to be fixed, right? It's more about acceptance. So the universal sign now is the infinity sign. Well, at CKFTO, we believe that, well, autism awareness is not just one day, it's not 1 month, but it's about really fostering the idea of inclusivity in a way where we can all contribute. And by contributing in a very positive way. And I think that everybody, every human being wants to be part of a whole, feel like a citizen, and that they are, giving back something to the community or involved in their circles. So the very difficult topic of autism. So this is really the definition of what autism is. And we're going to dive into some more stuff with autism, which will be, some might be a little complicated, but I'll try to give you what I can give you as best as I can demonstrate. Well, it is a neuro disability. And there's a difference between a disability and a disorder, right? And the difference is that a disorder is something that you can live with. So you may be wearing glasses. Well, you have a seeing disorder. You have a sight disorder, but it's fixable. You wear it with this, you wear your glasses and you're able to deal with your disability. A disability is something that impacts the way you live in a very profound way. A disorder is quite different from that. You can probably take a pill and might be able to get over it, but a disability affects how you're living, your everyday living is, right? And that's the very semantic difference between the two. So we talk about autism as symptoms usually being seen before the age of 3. Often you'll hear parents saying, oh, at 1.5, this child was great, bam, 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 and then all of a sudden he stopped talking, he stopped whatever. This is what the science says. It's what our medical developmental behavioral pediatricians, this is the definition they give, so I'm just repeating it to you. Now, for parents and for those with younger children, these are some of the things that you can often tell are a little odd. And that is that you may have a younger child who prefers to play alone, right? They really do not give you eye contact. And, communication is not just speech. You realize often when you have children that communication it's facial recognition, it is hand movements, it's so many of the other things that we take for granted, right? And of course, for someone who, like me, who had a stroke and was not able to speak, right? These things resonate with me that much more, right? So this little chart just shows some of the red flags for autism. And some things often enough, a lot of people who refer to us say, well, my sister's child, it's doing these things and they're odd to me, but I don't know how to approach her or whatever. We tend to, if you follow us on social media, put out these little things so we can really try and help the community and sometimes have those hard conversations with your cousin or your sister or your whoever. Say, here, listen, just saw an interesting post. Why don't you take a look at it? Because I noticed that Tommy is really doesn't make eye contact with me, or he's struggling to speak or stuff like that. So this is Sorry about that technical error. And it wasn't from me. And uh, I have to laugh at that because one of the funky things I had was alien hand syndrome. My left hand would just do what it wanted. So it wasn't me. So that's a little bit of the information. And as I said, autism looks different in different ages, right? So in a young child, you may see that, but in an older teenager, you may be seeing some different behavior. And the amazing thing about neurodiversity and autism, which are some of the strengths, is how they see the world, how that neuro brain works. And it is a very detailed brain. It's extremely detailed oriented. However, one of the other things that's so detail oriented, pattern seeking, there are things that they're really affinity to puzzles, to music, to very complex designs, right? Which are positives, I think, right? And the hyper focus, which allows people like a Bill Gates who can have a microprocessor of a brain because of the ability to hyper focus. So you might have seen a documentary on, I don't know, elephants in Asia, and you decided, listen, I'm going to research every single thing about elephants in Asia. And by the time you're finished, you could practically write a thesis on the elephant population in Asia, know from the anatomy to the life expectancy to the abuse of these animals in Asia, right? That's one of the key things about how this autistic brain trains. It's just so different, but so great and positive as well. And this is a very, this piece of information from this company that I like, they put out a lot of very, very good clinical information. Talks about as well the different types of autistic brains and why it seeks it, right? One of the big things with autism is that literal interpretation. Their world is in it's black or it's white. So they do not understand that gray area. So they're great for people who really, for careers like engineers and technology and other ones that require that detail, where you need very great focus, but not only that, you will not be emotionally attached to anything. So I think sometimes perhaps good lawyers, although you may not have the compassion that someone meets, or even a good doctor, but you may not have the compassion to be able to say, hey, your family is dying. You'll be black or white, listen, they're going into renal failure, they're going to die, right? So there are pros and there are cons, but that literal interpretation is one of the issues with this, and it's just how this brain works, right? So as I said, it is black or white, and there's no in between. And unfortunately, sometimes that inflexibility can also be problematic. Sometimes it can be used to its advantages. And that's what I think we as a society can do by incorporating these people in our workplaces. We can use the strength of this neurodiversity and this brain to harness the best that they could give into our workplace and our fields where we can use that strength. So what is ASD or autism spectrum disorder? Now it's pretty complex. So I hope you can stay with me, and I hope I can explain it as best as the medical profession would like it explained. So ASD, autism spectrum disorder, it's kind of like a rainbow. It involves a number of disorders. So it's classic autism, which is classic autism that we see, that we think of when we think of autism. We might think about those stimming kids who are flapping or headbutting or that sort of thing, and nonverbal and have really peculiar disorders, visual delays or disabilities. It's also involves some other, when people say I'm on the spectrum, it involves a lot of these spectrum disorders are like Asperger's. So these are the brilliant kids. These are the Elon Musk, the Bill Gates. I keep calling their names, but there are many more, right? That are super brilliant. They have the highest IQs, but they are so socially awkward. It's not funny. They definitely do not pick up on the communication skills because this is a communication disorder, a neurocommunicational disorder. So they do not pick up on the facial signals. They may be dribbling from the mouth. They are odd. they are really socially awkward and they don't fit into our social realm. So we kind of stay away from that because they're nerdy and they're odd. That is what we used to call Asperger's, but now we really they're all ASDs. There's PDD as well, which is another version of on the ASD. So sometimes psychologists might say, oh, your child has autism, or the child has ASD, they're PDD, or they're Asperger's, or they're just autistic. All right. There's also Rett's, which is another very rare degenerative form of autism, which only affects females. And I do know of one person here in Trinidad with Rett's. So this one is degenerative. So it means that your body's actually going to collapse and go down. But it's extremely rare. So the question is, what can we do? And I think because over the years, we've had a lot of better diagnosis. I think, growing up, we always saw people that were odd. You probably saw people in the community, in your church, that we would say that were odd, and we just never knew really what's wrong with them. And I think because we're better at testing and perhaps screening, and we have better resources in terms of assessments now, and we are way more knowledgeable, right? We can say, hey, I think this person may have this or may have that, right? So the question is, what can we do if you find out that a family member or a friend has autism? Well, one of the greatest things that we can do is occupational therapy, right? It is such a big part of helping people with autism live their lives to the best of their ability. So the question is, where can I get information? Well, we put out a lot of information on our CKFTU website, our social media, Instagram or Facebook tags, and we put out a number of various topics. So this is just part of our team here. It's not all of it. You'll see the rest of the crew online when you take a look. So if you have any questions, you can always call us, email us would probably be the best thing. So we could probably get directly into what we could do to help you or help someone you know. So the question is that you said occupational therapy is good for ASD, and why exactly? Is because if you look at the chart on your left, there's so many different components that autism affects or effects, right? So occupational therapists would work on, depending on again, each person is an individual and they have individual needs. So one of the persons may have a problem with sensory integration. So let's say one of the children that you see is, and you see them sometimes with the headphones, they're sensitive to noise, right? So their senses are either hypersensitive, or that's this, let's say the sense of hearing, right? One of your 8 senses might be affected to either hypersensitive to noise or hyposensitive, either hyper being oversensitive or hypo being undersensitive, right? So that's part of the sensory module. So for instance, you might have in the neurodivergent population, a child who we think have ADHD or ADD in class, and they're sitting in class and they cannot concentrate because they are hearing the whirling of the sound of that air conditioner. And they cannot focus on what the teacher is saying because all they could hear is the sound of that of the air conditioner, because they're so hypersensitive to the auditory sense, right? And that's where, for instance, the sensory part comes in. So what occupational therapists will go in and do is try to help assist them to fix those matters, fix in inverted commas, particularly because our brain processes what, I can't remember how many million signals from our environment neuropathically in a minute, and we filter out all the unnecessary. Some people who have sensory issues may not be able to filter out those things. So as I said, the child with the hearing, or it could be the same child sitting down in the classroom and their sense of feel their proprioception, not their sense of their tactile sense. They are feeling the breeze from the air conditioner moving every piece of hair on their skin, and they cannot focus. They're so hypersensitive. Or it could be the child who is undersensitive, right? This child cannot feel tactile its stimuli and will get cut or hit by a ball and not realize and just play very dangerous sports and get hurt and not feel it. We've had those, we've over the last 16 years I've been there, we've had those kids, right, that schools do not want because they don't feel pain, right? Because that tactile sense is hyposensitive, it's undersensitive. These are some of the things that occupational therapists will do with, and a lot of times those children get misdiagnosed as having ADD or ADHD because when that happens to you and you're sitting in a classroom, you're reactive. So you can't feel something, so you may be hitting something hard to try and get that input, right? You cannot, or you're feeling it too much, so you're fidgeting. As I said, the air conditioner moving the hair on your skin, so you're fidgeting, and you can't focus, and you become disruptive to all the other students around you, you know. So that's a little bit of what we do. So in talking about sensory there, I'm just giving you a couple ideas of some of the things that you see with your workers even. Now, these not necessarily only children that may be having some sort of a sensory overload. And I remember when I just had my stroke and I was in therapy, I had gone out, I used to have such bad sensory overload, and I would gone out to a store with my sister-in-law and could not deal. I was dazzled by the lights and all the racks of clothes and all this stuff. I started to freak out, right? And that's why, I mean, I can actually understand how difficult it must be to be a child and having these feelings, and you really don't have the language to explain to your mother, father, or anybody how it feels, you know. And sometimes you see your work colleague having some of these problems and not realizing that they're having a sensory overload. Now, I think by and large, as adults, we kind of realize when we're having an overload. I'll be in the middle of the day and I might just need a Coke, right? Because you need that, oh, you need that cup of coffee, you need that pick me up. It's because that sense in your body needs that little input, right? Your brain has to have time already send a signal to you that I need a cup of coffee right now, right? To whatever sense that is, right? To keep me going. These are just a couple of little examples, again, that you can take. To note even with your colleagues, to understand that, hey, I might just need a little minute, right? It's like, you're going into a presentation and you have that little stomach ache and all that. It's that same, one of those senses that are giving you that signal. So again, talking about adults, and as I said, from autism, from talking about finding a little, some of the red flags for children. And as I said, we've always tried to give a lot of information on what it looks like, different ages and stages. Well, with women and men, as you get older, it also looks a little different. So this chart is just to really just show what it looks like as you get older with females who might be on the spectrum. And I think we could all think of friends that we went to school or to college or to university or even in our work life, that you always think that something might be a little odd or something, there's something about them that you think that I don't know, can't put your finger on it. I encourage you to look at some of these charts. I mean, it might be that they have a habit of, I don't know, pulling their shirt, a habit of twitching, a habit of, and twitching's not a good one, but a habit of doing something that offers them comfort. They always walk with a stone in their pocket that they rub or whatever that calms them or something like that. And take a look at some of this information here, and hopefully we'll have it for you after. And you could again reference our Instagram, Facebook, or our webpage for information. But I think this is very pertinent because we all know someone like this. So again, this is just another chart. As I said, I'm referencing this company out of Australia that does do these really, really good info charts on autism. So of course, autism, primarily communication disorder, right? and like anything else, neurodiverse people, we all want to be normal. We all, like, when I say normal, we all want to be accepted, but communication signals tend to get crossed as to what society thinks communication is. So this is some information here. I hope that we can all take a look at, and socially and emotionally, again, they tend to might be a little bland. They don't really show their emotions very much, but they do have emotions. It's just they don't express it in the same way that we do, right? So it's really understanding that and appreciating it, that, yes, just because I'm not showing that I'm interested or that I don't care about your feelings doesn't mean that I don't have feelings. Just my brain is really thinking and programmed a different way. It's atypical, right? I'm just saying thank you. And I know I've shared a lot of information there. So feel free to reach out if there's any questions or any information that you need to get specifically on any aspect about neurodiversity and what we are offering for neurodiverse people. And any questions? I know I saw there was probably a question, but I'll be sure happy to answer. And again, thank you for Massy for having this initiative to help all your co-workers with and sensitize them to people who may be who are neurodiverse, and of course in your own work community. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I actually saw a hand up already. So, Warren,
Yes, I just wanted to say
Warren, I'm
I
not
really
hearing you. One second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say thank you for this session because actually I was diagnosed with autism, level 1 autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. So a lot of what Christina was talking about, I experienced as a child. But when you have ADHD and autism, they kind of not cancel out each other, but it's easy to appear high functioning. So from an early age, my first diagnosis was dyslexia. And then later on, it was ADHD. And then 10 years ago, while I was at law school, it was level 1 autism, which I vehemently rejected because I was like, there's no way it can be autistic because I'm at the top of my class at law school. And I could never be autistic because I didn't have a lot of information about what autism was at the time. So it was only years later that then through therapy, that I realized, well, I began to accept the diagnosis and realized that the whole time I thought I was special, it's not that I was special, it was that I was autistic. So from growing up, I always had the same special interests, everything we talk about, but I was always coddled or placated to be that I was special. So I grew up being a special child. So all my special interests were that, oh, well, he's special, and it was good because I was made to feel special, different, and special better. Because we're autistic people, we have systems, everything's a system, so nothing comes naturally for us. So I only recently rejoined corporate a year ago with Massy Remittances. I was consulting for the last 9 years because obviously it's very challenging to operate in a corporate setting. I would say, however, I manifested to work in an environment that'll be accepting of who I am. So my team here, they know I have autism. They are accustomed to me. My boss knows, my HR knows. Admittedly, they don't have a lot of experience with it, but again, they have grown to understand how I am. So all the stimming, all those things I do, and they're accustomed to me. So it's easier for me to like unmask where I work. So people like myself, we essentially mimic what we see as acceptable behavior. So because if I was my real self, I would not probably be successful in corporate. So we, from a very early age, realized that certain things are frowned upon. So what we do is we mimic personality traits that neurotypicals like. I'm still challenged with being direct because neurotypicals are very fake in terms of what they say. They don't mean.
Correct.
So, right. So they're very sensitive, whereas I would say exactly what I say, but I realize that people don't necessarily like that. So then I would feign shallowness most times, to be honest with you. So, but where I work is really supportive because they understand how I am. I explain it to them. I try to teach them. I try to send them articles and whatnot. But everything Christina is saying, I experience. I still STEM. I still do all these things. But and I'm actually nonverbal at home because like being here is like draining, like talking all day, being this person. So when I'm at home, I'm nonverbal. So I don't talk at home because that's my preferred being. But in a capitalist society, if you are an introvert or you're like that, you're not going to be successful truly. And very few neurotypical people are successful in a corporate setting. I'm proud of myself because I've managed to have some degree of success. I have like 4 qualifications, and when people say, "Oh, you do all these different things," everything is easy to me. And so with ADHD, people think that is that children can't pay attention. It's not. We can't pay attention. We already know the answer. We're bored. So I would like come first in class, but I taught too much because I already know the answers. So most time we are pretending we don't know. So I resonate with everything you say, and I really appreciate everything that you said. It kind of gives validity, and I really am impressed with Massy really understanding the benefits of neurodivergence. So, for example, yes, I'm a trained lawyer. I'm also a trained chef. I'm also a photographer. I also am a designer. I do so many different things, all these things that I want to be a doctor, and I did biology, chemistry, and physics, and all these things I do, but everything is easy. And the most menial tasks, and I tell them at work, are the hardest tasks. So for example, a report is mind numbing because there's no opportunity for intellectual stimulation in doing an operations report, right? So I'd rather write 10,000 words or write a book than to write a report, than to put numbers in a sheet. So it's like when it comes to stuff like pathological demand avoidance, and if you have a child, sometimes you might tell your child to do something, they don't want to do it. It's not that they're being stubborn. It's just like even as an adult, if I'm about to do something and you tell me to do it, I cannot do it anymore because it has to do with autonomy and wanting autonomy. And so that's something that people on the spectrum, we have a challenge with autonomy. Also, we don't really see hierarchy. So I speak to the custodian, I speak to the maid the same way I would speak to the CEO. Everyone is the same to me, which kind of like freaks out people because I don't really see you as like your position. I see you as a person. So grateful I can still do it respectfully, and I have a great relationship with my boss, and she understands me. And what I've realized is that a lot of people do displace signs of being on a spectrum, but they don't know. And sometimes when people are speaking to me and they're involved with me, and I'm like, and I can tell. So even here in Massy, I had a colleague come up to me and tell me she's on a spectrum as well too. She's ADHD, and I met a very high level senior person here, and I could tell they were spectrum coded, and they told me, yeah, actually they've always been like that their whole life, and they're brilliant. Wouldn't say who it is, obviously, but they're brilliant. So we are around, and it's good to see that a company like Massy is becoming more aware, because I think when people see you as being autistic, they think, well, you don't look like if you have anything wrong, and that's the whole thing. I don't want to look like if there's anything wrong with me. And so I'm really glad that I feel when I saw the course, I was like, well, I'm glad that it's on the radar for Massy, it's on the radar for the group, and hopefully then it will trickle down into the companies in terms of the awareness and the value that neurodivergent people can bring to our organization. So I just want to say thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Warren. I think I speak on everyone's behalf when I say that I think you sharing your lived experience really complemented what Elizabeth shared with us, and we thank you for being so vulnerable and open with the team. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
So I have a few questions in the chat for Elizabeth. The first is from Vanessa. Can you please explain different levels of autism?
Well, the thing with autism testing, it depends on what test they've used. We are certified ADOS testing, which is really the gold seal test for autism. I probably am not the right person to actually do that. I think one of our occupational therapists who are ADOS certified
Yeah.
would be the better person, but I could get you that information because a lot of times here I find people diagnosed, okay, level 1, level 2, level 3, and I'm wondering what tests are they using? Are they using the ADOS test or are they using one of the other psychological tests? So I'd stay away from that, but I could give you the ADOS, which is the gold seal for autism, testing what level 1, level 2, and level 3 is. But I want, Warren, you're amazing because I will tell you this, right? Um, the I myself over life have thought about, there were so many people that I realize now growing up that I always thought was odd. And I realize now that they're on the spectrum, right? And they were poorly diagnosed or whatever, they had to go away to school or whatever. But one of the things that I think that society benefits from, and the US in particular, or more, well, most of the scholarships that went for disability in the States were for all those children who were Asperger's, just like yourself, Warren, who were extremely high functioning, brilliant, and they were the ones who got all the disability scholarships. So when the US would say, yeah, we're giving like 2%, 3% of our scholarships to disabilities, they're all those kids, right? And I say kids, but young adults, you know what I mean? So we've always, people with ASD have always been in a system, but I'm glad that you spoke about how you can make accommodations in your workplace. And that's one thing we do as occupational therapists, try to help teachers, try to help employers, try to help parents understand the accommodations that they need to make for their children, right? That, this is not a disease, like it's not going to change. These people have a lot to offer, right? A neurodiverse brain has a lot to offer. Let's zone in and tune into that and see what we can get the best out of it. I'm thinking that we have a young adult, a migrant actually, that we had assessed who is extremely creative. I mean, I think you've seen on social media, these guys who throw paint on a wall and they come up with, this kid is like that. And I'm thinking, wow, if we could find employment for him to harness that creative energy he has in I don't know what, in a graphics company or whatever, this could be brilliant. He has so much to offer, So
Vanessa had another question, but I think it may be tied into the first, and of course we'll share that information with her. And it was, how many symptoms do a child need to have diagnosed with autism? So
I think it's hard to say because autism is a spectrum, but I think when you look at our red flags, I think that's your key thing. So if you see 1 or 2 or 3 now, then I think you should look at it, because the problem is that pediatricians will tell you, well, if you are looking at your developmental stages of your child, right, and you're missing more than 2, I think it's time to talk to your pediatrician or take a read or take a look at. I mean, 16 years ago, there wasn't this information on the internet, right? We didn't have access to this thing. So you know, but speech communication is, there's a feedback, is key, because a lot of times you find doctors or parents call up, I need speech therapy for my child. My child is not speaking, right? And often enough, we have to put this child into occupational therapy before we could even get to speech therapy to get them regulated. But speech is one of the indicators, but may not be the only indicator. As I said, some of those um, communication signals, they do not look at you when they're talking, repetitive behavior, uh, very rigid behavior, not able to play with toys oddly, or not be able to play alongside their peers and not with their peers. Those are some of the key points of communication, because again, we often think that communication is speech alone, but it's so much more. I'm talking to you with my hands, with my eyes, with my facial expressions, you know. And as you say, Warren, I remember teaching my son and having, my son has been in therapy since he's 2.5 years old, and him having to learn what different facial signals mean, you know, and his expression to me when he could speak of what he thought they meant was profound as well, you know.
We have a question from Andrew. What are the benefits to having a diagnosis for school-age children in Trinidad?
But the huge benefits. I think in Trinidad, it's huge benefits because if your child has to do SEA, you can get accommodation for SEA, right? Now, depending on what your child needs are, it might be a scribe. It could be so many different things. In Trinidad, for accommodation for SEA tends to be extra time, right? Now, you may need the extra time depending on your child's needs too, because of how your person processes the work. Or it could be they need extra time because they have motor skills to write. Because again, and Warren might be able to acquiesce to this, a lot of persons on the spectrum are so proper with how things are done that if it's not perfect, they will not accept it. So if it's their handwriting, they have to take their time to make sure that it is perfect. When you produce a document, more often than not, it is perfect. It might take them a long time to produce it because they want it to be so perfect. But their idea of perfection may be like 200%, instead of just like what we would think of 100%, you know? So it's such, and that neurotypical brain is so interesting. And I don't know how many of you all have ever seen the show now. They've had Love on the Spectrum.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yes. I had a couple of questions, Elizabeth.
Sure.
The first is, how can organizations move beyond the compliance and truly embrace neurodiversity as a strength? And if you have any examples of that being done in the Caribbean.
Well, I don't know if it's neurodiversity, but I think there are a couple of organizations that I see in Trinidad and Tobago that have actively tried to employ persons with disabilities in their workplace. And of course, I gave you the example of Spain, where you're mandated 2% of your organization, which I think is brilliant. Now, we had signed on to the United Nations Convention for Persons with Disabilities. 2016, I think I remember, if I remember well, or before. And we worked very hard, us and NCPD and the whole community to get that, to that convention, to get Trinidad onto the convention. And I don't think we've done much with it as a country, right? I think we really need to focus on trying to get companies like yourself to promote neurodiversity, right? Now, I know to having people and inclusivity, we have done in the past a lot of simulations to show people just the simple things of accessibility. We do not have many accessible buildings in Trinidad and Tobago at all. And we don't have any codes and laws that say every building you build needs to be accessible, right? I think there's small things like that we could do. I mean, in the past, when we had our first disabled minister in government, he couldn't even get into any of the buildings, right? The president had to do, I remember function, the president had to do a ramp for him to enter. And it was embarrassing. He was in a wheelchair, right? So, I mean, when you look at those even simple things, and we've done that in offices, you know, to try and put stuff in a wheelchair and try to get through in a door that you have to pull when you have in a wheelchair, and it's a mechanical wheelchair. There's so many simple things. But I think if companies really made an effort to try and see how they can embrace neurodiversity and people with special needs in their organization, I think it would be a win-win.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to read a message from Michael before we wrap up. He said, I look forward to the continuity of this conversation and how we can, through policy, infrastructure, and recruitment, make available opportunities for those who are otherwise able, wheelchair users, those that are hearing and visually impaired, etc. Great session.
Thank you.
So we are getting a lot of compliments in the chat as well, that it was a pretty good session, a great session, and very informative. So we look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the future.
Certainly.
So everyone, on behalf of the Bonus and Benefits and MyPulse team, we thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. Again, we hope to continue it in the future. We look forward to your feedback and your experiences as we move on. And we hope that you'll have a wonderful day, and we'll see you later this month for our next live MyPulse session. Take care, everyone.
I hope everyone goes on and takes a look at these sites. There is so much information.